Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are ready to resume the trial of State of Georgia versus Edrick Faust, SU 24CR0547. Is the state ready to proceed?
We're ready, Your Honor.
Is the defense ready to proceed?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, you may call your next witness, Mr. Bolden.
Thank you. State would call Xykiera Sims.
Could you get Xykiera Sims, please? Thank you.
You can go ahead and have a seat. Ma'am, if you could please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that your testimony in the matter pending before the court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay. And if you could start by stating and spelling your name for our court reporter, please.
It's Xykiera Sims, spelled Xykiera, last name Sims.
And how are you employed, ma'am?
I'm employed with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, also known as the State Crime Lab, and the Division of Forensic Science.
And what is your position at the State Crime Lab?
I am a forensic DNA analyst.
How long have you been employed by the Crime Lab?
Over 4 years.
And based on your time at the State Crime Lab, are you classified as a senior scientist?
Yes.
Can you please explain what your job entails?
I receive evidence from state and local agencies in which I perform DNA analysis on. I also interpret data as well as generate reports that summarize my findings and conclusions. I also testify in court when needed.
Can you talk a little bit about your educational background?
I received a Bachelor's of Science in Forensic Science, as well as a Master's of Science in Biology from Western Carolina University. I also went through in-house training at the GBI, in which we were given lectures, PowerPoints, and literature reviews that outlined the entire DNA analysis process. We also were given mock case samples in which we performed the DNA analysis process on. We had to take and pass several written, oral, and practical exams. And then I went through a phase of supervised casework.
Ms. Sims, just briefly, what is DNA?
DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It is the genetic blueprint of life. You receive half from your mother, half from your father, and DNA is unique to each individual with the exception of identical siblings.
Can you explain briefly how DNA testing is performed?
We start by taking a cutting of a sample, placing it in a tube with chemicals to release any DNA that may be on that evidence item through a step called extraction. We then figure out how much DNA is in that sample through a step called quantification. We make many copies of specific regions of interest along the DNA, and then we separate and detect those copies in order to establish a visual representation of your DNA known as a DNA profile.
Okay. And is what you've just described the well-established DNA analysis method that's been around for approximately 25 years?
Yes.
Are you personally certified, ma'am?
I am not.
Okay. And are you a member of any professional societies?
I am not.
Have you testified before in court?
I have.
Approximately how many times?
13.
Okay. And are those in various superior courts throughout the state of Georgia?
Yes.
Okay. And have you been qualified as an expert in those times that you've testified in court?
Yes, I have.
Your Honor, at this time I would move to tender Ms. Sims as an expert in forensic biology and DNA analysis.
Any objection?
Our objection from a prior hearing, but we respect the Honorable Court's ruling. We would have the same objection.
The same objection. Thank you. I'm going to overrule the objection and admit this witness as an expert in forensic biology and what was the other one that's
DNA analysis, Your
in
Honor.
forensic biology and DNA analysis. You may continue.
Ms. Sims, before we get into DNA testing that you did in connection with this case, I want to kind of fast forward a little bit to August of 2024. In that time period, were you asked to create cuttings from certain pieces of evidence that had already been submitted to the crime lab?
Yes, I was.
And may I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
All right. Ms. Sims, I'm going to hand you first what has previously been marked or entered into evidence as State's Exhibit 25 and State's Exhibit 143. You already got your gloves on. Okay, excellent. Take a look at those. You recognize those items, ma'am?
I do.
And so essentially is State's Exhibit 143 an envelope containing cuttings that you took from State's Exhibit 45 and then sealed into an envelope?
Yes.
You recognize that by the unique DOFS case number as well as your initials on State's 143?
Yes, the unique Division of Forensic Science case number as well as my initials and date.
I'll take those back on the swaps on that one. Same question here. I'm handing you what's been previously tendered into evidence as State's 26 and State's 144. And ask you the same question. Do you recognize those, ma'am?
I do.
And just as before, Ms. Sims, did you take the contents of State's 26 and make cuttings of that, which you then placed into State's, I believe, 144?
Yes, I did.
And just as before, do you recognize that by the unique Division of Forensic Science case number as well as your initials and date of August 30th of 2024?
Yes, I do.
So now I do want to go back to earlier in 2024. In, I want to say, February or March of that year, was certain DNA analysis requested on the case involving a victim by the name of Tara Baker.
Yes, our first service of male DNA screening.
Okay. And can you briefly describe how that testing was performed?
We took a cutting of the swab submitted within the kit. We placed it in a tube with chemicals to release any DNA that's present. We then figured out how much DNA, specifically looking for the presence of any male DNA within that sample.
And I don't want to get too in detail about it, but what was the testing kit that you used to screen for the presence of male DNA in this case?
We used the Quantifiler Trio quantification kit.
Okay. And if you know, ma'am, how long has that particular kit been used by the GBI Crime Lab?
The GBI validated in 2017 and started implementing it in 2017.
And Ms. Sims, is that particular kit more sensitive than testing that existed back in 2001?
Yes, it is.
And when you used that particular kit, did you do so on 3 separate items that had been submitted from the sexual assault kit collected at the time of Ms. Baker's autopsy?
Yes, I had 3 items. I had item 2B, rectal swabs. I had item 2J, oral swab B, and then 2I, oral swabs B, and then 2J, oral swabs A.
Okay. And can you please tell the jury what, if any, results you had when you screened for the presence of male DNA in those 3 pieces of evidence?
Those 3 pieces of evidence all revealed the presence of male DNA.
May?
I'm gonna hand you what's from Washington State's 163. Do you recognize that, ma'am?
I do.
What is it?
It is the male DNA screening report that I generated.
Okay. Does that report accurately summarize the results of the male DNA screening test that you just described to the jury?
It does.
163, Your Honor.
Any objection?
No, ma'am.
It is admitted.
Okay. Moving forward, after you had determined that there was an amount of male DNA present in each of those items, 2B, 2I, 2J, what was the next step that you undertook, ma'am?
All three of those pieces of evidence items went on to a DNA typing request service.
Okay, and if you could briefly describe how that test is performed.
We took a cutting of each of those evidence item samples. We placed it in a tube with chemicals to release the DNA. We used a specific DNA extraction method that allowed us to separate into two fractions, one of which is non-sperm fraction, and then the other sperm cell fraction. We then figured out how much DNA was in those samples. We then made many copies of specific regions along the DNA, and then we separated and detected those copies and established DNA profiles.
And so you spoke a little bit about fractions, and I want to talk just a little bit more in detail about that. Can you describe how this particular step in your analysis is able to separate, I think you said sperm cells from non-sperm cells?
Hang on a second, Mr. Bolden, if you'll just wait for just a moment. All right, you may ask that question again.
Ms. Sims, I believe my question was if you could speak in just a little bit more detail about how this differential extraction step is able to separate, I believe you said sperm cells from non-sperm cells.
It's called a differential extraction, and it utilizes the structure of sperm cells to its advantage. So we start by taking the cutting, putting it in a tube with chemicals to release the DNA. This will be any non-sperm cells. Then we are able to move that to a separate tube and categorize that as our first fraction or our non-sperm fraction.
All right, hang on just a moment, please. Yes, sir.
We may need to send the jury out for this one, Your Honor.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to send you into the jury room. Please don't discuss the case. You all may be seated. Before we get started, I just want to make sure that everyone in the courtroom has their cell phone put away and off. There's a lot of distraction going on from people coming and going in the courtroom to the outside and back again, and it is very distracting. And so, first of all, I'm going to ask everyone who's in the audience if you can remain seated as much as possible. That would be incredibly helpful. But also, our bailiff is doing a really good job of making sure that people are not using their cell phones, and I appreciate that very much. But she's in charge, and you cannot have your cell phone on or out. And so I ask everybody to cooperate. If you don't, you're not going to be able to stay. Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Cruz, go ahead.
Sure. So the testimony from Ms. Sims is extremely prejudicial because GBI, as a policy, they do not refer to second fraction cells as sperm because second fraction could be skin cells, it could be saliva, it could be sperm. But the testimony that Ms. Sims has given is outside of the scope of what she would be able to testify to as a GBI agent. She just looked directly at the jury and told the jury that she has non-sperm cells as well as sperm cells. And there is no evidence in this case, but it has been put before the jury at this time, that the DNA that was found was sperm.
All right, thank you. Mr. Bolden, any response to the objection? All right.
I mean, I disagree. I think that
Well, the witness is here. Ms. Sims, is there a GBI policy that you...
Mr. Cruz, we're not going to go
Your Honor.
there.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry. But this is...
So I'm making a ruling about your objection. We have had a hearing outside the presence of the jury where this court ruled that this testimony is admissible. We've gone through a lot of this, and I'm going to overrule your objection.
Well, I'll ask you this, Your Honor. We didn't get into sperm at the... I think... I'll say this. I don't think I'm asking for at this time is an instruction to the jury. But if it's denied, if you're saying you're denying my request, I accept that ruling. But I would ask if I could have the opportunity to flesh that issue out for the purposes of the appellate record if need be.
Not at this time, Mr. Cruz, and I'm overruling your objection.
Yes, ma'am.
If you would like to submit some sort of jury instructions that we can talk about in terms of alerting the jury to your issues, we'll do that at charge conference. But this testimony has already been ruled admissible by this court at a previous hearing, and I'm not overturning that order. So
Yes,
that'll
ma'am.
be all. Thank you. Anything else before I bring the jury in? All right, you may bring the jury in. Thank you. You may be seated. Mr. Bolden, you may begin. If you want
you, Your
to
Honor.
ask that question again, you may. We were, I've distracted you all from an announcement, so go ahead.
And Ms. Sims, basically what I want to get to is in the process of this differential extraction, does that always result in a perfect separation of male DNA from female DNA?
No, it doesn't.
Can you speak just generally to how, I guess, there might be some, it's a horrible word, but I can't think of anything else, commingling of those after a differential extraction?
It is sample dependent, and it can be how much male DNA or female DNA we had to begin with. There could be some carryover between both of the fractions.
Thank you. Now, after you perform this differential extraction on these three pieces of evidence, I think you talked about 2B, 2I, and 2J, were you able to obtain a DNA profile from the first fraction of all three of those pieces of evidence?
Yes, I was.
And in all three instances, to whom did the DNA profile belong in that first fraction?
The DNA from the first fraction of 2B, 2I, and 2J all match the profile of Tara Baker.
Now, as it relates to the second fraction of each of these pieces of evidence, I think maybe we should go one at a time. So I want to speak first to item 2B, which is the rectal swab.
You may. And I need to take care of a matter that is unrelated to this moment, but I need to take care of it now. And so I'm going to ask you to go into the jury room and not discuss the case. I'm going to let you step down and have a seat outside and stretch your legs and things of that nature, and we'll be with you as soon as possible. Thank you very much. If you'll go into the jury room, don't discuss the case. And you may step down. You know, may all be seated. Thank you. All right, everyone be at ease for a couple of minutes.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you. You may bring the jury in. So there's nothing. You all may be seated. Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We're ready to resume. Mr. Bolden, you may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Sims, I want to, okay, we were talking, if I remember correctly, about what data or conclusions you were able to make related to the second fractions on each of these three items of evidence, 2B, 2I, 2J. Does that sound right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to go a little out of order, and I want to start with item 2I. And 2I, is that you have that marked as oral swabbings B?
Yes, that's what it was labeled as.
Okay. And so in the second fraction of item 2I, were you able to develop a partial major DNA profile in that particular fraction?
Yes, the DNA was obtained from at least two individuals, and a partial major DNA profile was developed that could not be contributed to Tara Baker or Chris Melton.
And was that partial major profile obtained that you said did not belong to Tara Baker, did not belong to Chris Melton, was that eligible for entry into CODIS?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Is CODIS a national database of DNA?
It is.
And are there approximately 23 million samples in CODIS as of December 25?
Yes.
Okay. And once an item is entered into CODIS, is it compared on a routine basis to other profiles found in that database?
Yes.
Okay, now I'm going to go back to 2B and 2J. Did you obtain information related to DNA profiles or potential DNA profiles in each of those items?
Yes, DNA data was obtained from the second fraction of both of those items. However, due to a complex mixture and low-level data, it was sent off to true allele analysis.
Okay. And would that be for each of those, 2B, which is rectal swabs, and 2J, which is, I believe, this is where I get really confused, oral swabbings A?
Yes.
And you mentioned that those were forwarded over to true allele. Ms. Sims, are you trained in true allele?
No, I am not.
Okay, and so that data, then just to be clear, was forwarded, almost dropped my pen, forwarded to another scientist who is trained to use true allele?
Yes.
Okay. And just like before, Ms. Sims, as it relates to the DNA typing that you were able to do in this differential extraction process, did you create a report to summarize your findings?
Yes.
Just like before?
Yes.
Okay. If I can approach, Your Honor.
You may.
I'm going to hand you what's been marked as States 164. Is that just a copy of the report that you generated summarizing the findings that you just discussed with the jury?
Yes, it is.
Any objection?
No, ma'am.
It's admitted.
All right. Ms. Sims, lastly, at some point after doing the DNA typing analysis that you just described, were you able to conduct DNA analysis with the partial major profile that you just described in item 2I, comparing that to a known sample of DNA obtained from Edrick Faust?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And from where did you obtain that DNA profile of Mr. Faust?
It was from a known reference sample that was submitted.
Were those buccal swabs?
Yes, those are buccal swabs.
Okay. And particularly as it relates to any analysis that you were able to perform between that partial major profile in item 2I and the known buccal, known profile obtained from the buccal swab of Mr. Faust, what were the results of that comparison?
The DNA that was obtained from item 2I, the partial major profile was compared, and it was a match to Edrick Faust, and the frequency in which we would expect the particular DNA profile, the partial major developed, is 1 in 800 quadrillion, and that's 800 followed by 15 zeros. And that's how often we would expect to see that particular partial major DNA profile in a given population.
So 1 in 800 quadrillion, did I get that right?
Yes.
And if you know, ma'am, approximately how many people are located on the planet?
Approximately 8 billion.
Ms. Sims, those are all the questions that I have for you. Defense counsel may have some questions. Thank you, ma'am.
Cross-examination, Mr. Cruz.
Good afternoon, Ms. Sims. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for asking. My name is Ahmad Cruz, and I have the privilege and honor of representing Mr. Faust. Is it okay if I ask you a couple of questions?
Yes.
All right. I want to go back to something you mentioned on direct examination. You mentioned a non-sperm fraction and a sperm fraction. Do you remember making that statement?
Yes.
Did you test the DNA for sperm?
No, it's not a confirmatory test. The extraction method itself theoretically separates into those fractions.
Were you aware that GBI did conduct a sperm test?
On the
Swabs.
Swabs.
Correct, that you had.
I was not aware.
Okay, so you're not aware that the GBI determined that those swabs did not contain sperm?
I was not aware.
And just to make sure we're clear, you didn't test it for sperm, is that right?
I did not.
And the swabbings that you tested, is it fair to say that you tested 2 oral swabs?
Yes.
Okay, and 1 anal swab?
Yes, labeled as rectum and oral A and B.
And pursuant to GBI policy and your testing, it is common to receive 2 or more oral swabs. Is that fair?
I think it depends on the specific kit, what you receive within the sexual assault kit.
Sure. What do you typically receive?
We typically receive orifice swabs. We do see oral swabs.
How many? Just typically, on average.
On average, I usually see 1.
Okay. How long has the GBI had access to True Allele?
I'm not sure. I'm not trained in True Allele.
Okay. In this case, was it uncommon to receive 2 oral swabs?
I couldn't say.
Well, you said on average you receive 1. So you don't know if it's common or uncommon if you see 2?
I wouldn't say that I haven't seen 2 before, but I also, on average, I typically see 1 oral swab package labeled, but it is case specific and kit specific what they collect and how they label them and what they submit.
Sure, that's fair. You've seen kits where you've had 3 oral swabs, is that correct?
Not that I recall.
Never?
Not that I recall.
And how long have you been with GBI?
Approximately 4 years.
How long have you been in the division dealing with DNA?
4 years.
Course indulgence. No further questions. Thank you.
Any redirect, Mr. Bolden?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
I forgot. My apologies. We were talking about the DNA analysis that you performed on that partial major profile from item 2I with the known reference sample of Edrick Faust. just like before, did you reduce your findings that you just testified to in the form of a report in that case as well?
Yes, I did.
Better approach the witness, Your Honor.
Okay.
This is stage 165 in Sims. Is that just a copy of your report related to the comparison that you did between that partial major profile and the known sample from the defendant, Edrick Faust?
Yes, it is.
Any objection?
No objection. I think I have a continuing on the record regarding reports with hearsay, but otherwise, no objection.
All right, it is admitted.
Those are all the questions that I have.
Any recross, Mr. Cruz?
No, ma'am.
May this witness be excused.
Ask that she be excused, Your Honor.
Any objection from the defense?
No, ma'am.
You are free to go. You may call your next witness.
Ashley Hinkle?
Sorry, did you say Hinkle?
Hinkle.
Could you get Ashley Hinkle, please?